Billionaire dragged the black maid across the floor in front of the mansion's grand entrance. Then, her son stepped forward, his badge glinting under the moonlight. No one at the Carrington estate could have imagined what was about to unfold. The mansion loomed on the edge of the city, a towering symbol of untold wealth and power. Inside, every room gleamed with the opulence of imported furnishings, priceless art, and the scent of fear. Maria Edwards moved silently through the expanse of hallway, polishing the marble floors that had seen more luxury than most could ever dream of. She had served the Carrington family for 12 long years, years marked by routine and silence, a life defined by duty and invisible servitude. But that night, everything changed. She reached for a silver candlestick, her hands trembling slightly. When the door to the study creaked open behind her, the voices were hushed but urgent. She froze, glancing through the reflection of the polished glass, her breath caught in her throat. There they were, Henry Carrington, the billionaire tycoon, and his lawyer, Greg Thornton. Maria instinctively stepped back into the shadows, her heart pounding. Henry's voice wavered, not from fear, but from a deep, consuming guilt. "Greg, if this gets out, it's over," Henry muttered. "5 men died, but we covered it up. No one can ever know." Maria's world stopped. Her hand faltered, the cloth falling from her grip. 5 men died. Her husband had been one of them. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled back from the study, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the rag she was holding. She had heard everything. Everything that Alexander Reeves and his lawyer had whispered behind closed doors. The weight of their words pressed against her chest like a suffocating vice. She had worked at the Reeves mansion for nearly a decade, her life as a maid defined by routine, dusting shelves, mopping floors, serving meals, silent, unseen, yet always present. The mansion, with its glass walls and polished marble, had always felt like a world apart, but tonight it felt like a prison. The words she had overheard shattered everything. The factory collapse, the deaths of 5 men, and the desperate attempts to bury it all. She could feel the guilt curling in her stomach, twisting into knots. It wasn't just corporate greed that had taken lives, it was something much darker, something that her hands, as a maid, could no longer ignore.
Maria paused for a breath, pressing her back against the cool glass of the hallway window. She had to get out, had to escape before anyone noticed her. The truth could destroy everything. She could already hear Alexander's voice, cold and dangerous, echoing in her mind. "If one word of what you think you heard leaves your lips, you'll regret it." Her own reflection stared back at her in the glass, haunted, terrified, but a flicker of something else sparkled in her eyes. The truth. And she couldn't turn away from it now. Her hand reached for the door handle, but it froze in midair as the voices behind her grew louder. She heard the heavy footsteps of Alexander himself, followed by the distinct click of his polished shoes against the marble floors. Panic gripped her throat, but she knew there was no way to hide now. She was caught. "You were listening." His voice boomed from behind her, each word dripping with a chilling sense of authority. Maria spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. She stammered, I was just cleaning, Mr. Reeves. I wasn't—" "Cleaning?" His gaze flicked to the rag in her hand, then to her face. "You were listening. You heard everything." She shook her head frantically, trying to regain control of her voice. "No, Mr. Reeves, I didn't hear anything, I swear." But her words felt hollow in the face of his intense scrutiny. He took a slow step closer, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Don't lie to me. You've been working here long enough to know what happens to people who cross me." Maria's knees threatened to get out beneath her. The fear in his eyes, the coldness in his stare, it was like nothing she had ever felt before. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure, but every instinct in her screamed that this was it. She couldn't run now, not without consequences. "Please, Mr. Reeves, I've worked here for 10 years. You know me. I would never—" Her voice trailed off, barely a whisper against the weight of the threat hanging in the air. "You'll keep your mouth shut." His words were icy, final. "If one word of what you think you heard leaves your lips, I'll make sure you disappear."
The silence that followed was suffocating. She stood there, frozen, unsure of how to respond. The threats, the promises, none of it mattered. The truth had already planted its roots in her heart, and no matter how many threats Alexander Reeves made, she couldn't erase what she had learned. "You'll pack your things tonight," he said, his voice turning cold, devoid of the slightest remorse. "Leave before dawn, and if you try to reach anyone at all, you'll never make it far enough to tell them." Maria nodded numbly, her hands shaking as she clutched the rag to her chest. She didn't want to leave, not with this hanging over her. The truth was too big, too dangerous to ignore, and yet there was nothing she could do. Not yet. As he turned to lock the front door, the finality of his actions hit her. The sound of the bolts sliding into place was like a death knell, echoing through the stillness of the mansion. There was no escape, no way to undo what had already been set in motion. "Good night, Maria," he said, his voice flat, almost dismissive. "And remember, silence is the only thing that keeps you alive." The words hung in the air as he walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Maria stood still for a moment longer, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. She could feel the walls closing in around her. The mansion had never felt smaller, never felt more suffocating. The truth wasn't something she could forget. She couldn't just pack up and walk away. But what could she do? Who would believe her if she told anyone? The power Alexander wielded over everything, over everyone. How could she stand up to him? How could anyone? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft hum of the clock in the corner of the room. Time was ticking, the night was slipping away, and she had to make a decision. Would she run? Would she stay? The next morning, the sun rose over the Reeves mansion like it had every other day. Light poured through the towering glass windows, bathing the rooms in warmth, but Maria felt cold. The weight of last night's events pressed down on her shoulders as she moved through the house, preparing the breakfast for the family. It felt like a courtroom, each movement deliberate and calculated. The sound of the coffee machine felt louder than usual, each hiss and pop echoing in her head. She had no choice. She would leave. She had to. But as she finished packing her bags, an unexpected knock at the door startled her. Her breath caught in her throat as the door creaked open, revealing Alexander standing there, his face tight with barely contained rage. "You're still here," he said, his voice low, dripping with venom. Maria stiffened, her heart hammering. I just wanted to finish breakfast before I leave, sir." He chuckled coldly, stepping into the room. "Breakfast? After last night?" His eyes narrowed, and his gaze flicked to the bags by the door. "You think you can just walk away after what you heard?" She swallowed, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. I didn't mean to hear anything, sir," she whispered, her voice quivering. I was just doing my job." His hand slammed down on the counter, making the silverware rattle. "Your job is to clean, not to listen." Her breath caught. She had never seen him like this, so full of rage, so volatile. His words were sharp, like knives, and Maria could feel the sting of every one. "People like you don't get to talk about men like me," he said, his voice dangerously soft. The words cut through her. "People like me?" She forced herself to look him in the eye. "The men who died in that factory were people too. Fathers, sons, brothers. They deserve the truth." His face twisted with fury. Without warning, his hand shot out, striking her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the kitchen, sharp and cruel. Maria stumbled back, her cheek burning, but she refused to cry. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "You will keep your mouth shut," he hissed,
stepping closer, or I'll make sure you disappear before anyone can find you. Her pulse raced, her heart pounded in her chest, but something inside her began to burn. The truth was too powerful. It always found its way out. "If anything happens to me," she whispered through clenched teeth, "my son will know. He's a detective, and he doesn't scare easily."
Alexander stopped, the color draining from his face. For a moment, a flicker of fear crossed his eyes. The arrogant billionaire was no longer in control. It was a fleeting moment, but Maria saw it. "I'm just telling you," she said quietly. "The truth always finds its way out, even from the mouth of a maid." The morning light filtered through the windows, but Maria felt trapped in an eternal dusk. She was packed and ready to leave, but her mind was tangled in a web of fear, guilt, and the undeniable truth she couldn't ignore. Alexander's threats echoed in her mind, but they didn't silence her anymore. They made her stronger. She was about to walk out the door when she saw him again. Alexander. This time, he wasn't just the billionaire boss. He was something far darker, a man whose power and pride were built on the suffering of others. And now he was staring her down, cold fury in his eyes, like she was the enemy. "You think you're just going to walk away?" His voice was a low growl, a warning buried in every word. Maria's body tensed. I'm not walking away from anything, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm leaving because I know too much, and so do you." His expression tightened, his lips curling into a sneer. "Don't make the mistake of thinking you have any control over this. You're nothing but a maid, a servant." The words cut like knives. "Do you honestly think you can stand up to me?" Maria squared her shoulders, looking him dead in the eyes. "I think the truth is stronger than all the power you have." The words left her lips before she could even stop herself, but they felt right. A deep silence fell between them, and for a moment, Alexander seemed to recoil as though struck. His jaw clenched tightly, and his eyes flicked to the door behind her. The threat in his gaze was unmistakable. "You think I'll let you get away with this?" His voice was no longer smooth or controlled. It was raw, desperate. "No one talks about me like that. No one!" "I'm not talking about you, Alexander. I'm talking about the truth, about the men you killed." Her words were quiet, but they carried the weight of everything she had learned in that study. She hadn't just heard corporate secrets. She had heard a confession, and it would haunt her if she did nothing. He stepped closer, his presence looming over her like a storm cloud ready to break. "You're delusional if you think anyone will believe you. No one cares about a maid's word, especially when it's against me." But she wasn't afraid anymore. "I don't care if they believe me. I know what happened. I know about the factory collapse and the men you paid to keep quiet. I know about the bribes and the lies. And now, so do you." Her voice shook only once, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. She wouldn't. His face twisted into a grimace, his hands balled into fists at his sides. For a long, terrifying moment he was silent. Then his lips curled into a smile, one that was far from friendly. "You're making a huge mistake, Maria. A very, very big mistake." She stepped back, the weight of his presence pressing down on her. Every inch of her screamed for escape, for safety. But she stood her ground. She had nothing to lose now. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice quieter now. "I'm leaving, but I'm not leaving the truth behind." His laughter was cold, detached. "You'll regret this," he said, before turning away, his back straight with that same air of superiority. "But it doesn't matter. You'll be gone by morning, and your little story will disappear with you." Maria watched him walk out of the room. the sound of his footsteps fading, but his threat lingered in the air. She had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain: she would not back down. Later that afternoon, Maria stood in her small room, staring out the window, watching the gardeners work in the distance. The hum of the city was far below, just a faint murmur against the towering mansion's walls. The day felt normal on the surface, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every rustling of the leaves, every movement in the house seemed to hold a warning. She could feel Alexander's presence in every room she entered, as though his eyes were always on her. His threats had shaken her, but they didn't break her. She had survived worse. She had always survived. But what about now? She felt torn between leaving everything behind and staying to face the storm. She had worked here for so long, sacrificed so much. But if she left, she would carry the truth with her, and the knowledge that for the first time in her life, she might not be able to protect herself. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its ticking louder than ever. Time was running out. She needed to make a decision. As she packed her last bag, her thoughts kept drifting back to the factory collapse, the lives lost, the families waiting for answers. She couldn't let them go unheard. Not now. Then there was a knock at the door. Maria's heart skipped a beat and her breath caught in her throat. It was him again, Alexander. "Maria," he called, his voice like ice. "Come down here." She froze. The fear that had once been there, heavy and suffocating, was now replaced with something else, a quiet, resolute strength. She wouldn't let him break her. She wouldn't let him control her anymore. Taking a steadying breath, she walked down the hallway, each step feeling like it echoed in her chest. When she reached the study, Alexander was waiting, his face tight with barely contained anger. But there was something different about him now, something flickering behind his eyes that didn't seem entirely like the man she had known for years. Fear. Real fear. "You're still here," he said, his voice low, filled with something almost like disbelief. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Not until I speak the truth. About everything." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping over her like he was trying to figure out what game she was playing. But there was no game. She was done with that. She was done playing by his rules. "Your son," he muttered, breaking the silence. "What do you think he'll do when he hears what you're saying?" Maria swallowed hard. "He'll do what's right." Alexander's expression faltered for a second, a crack appearing in his armor, but he quickly recovered, his smile cold and cruel. "You think I'm scared of your son?" His voice dripped with condescension. "Do you think that little detective can stop me?" "I don't think he'll stop you, Alexander," Maria replied, "but you should be scared of the truth, because that's the one thing you can't control." She stood there, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of him. For the first time in years, Maria stood with her head high. The battle was far from over, but she had already won something greater: the truth. The tension that had once weighed so heavily on her now seemed lighter, though the air still carried the remnants of everything she had learned. Alexander's threats and his presence lingered, but the sound of approaching justice was louder. Detective Ethan Carter moved through the grand hallway, guiding Maria with careful steps, his calm demeanor grounding her in the storm that had just unfolded. "Maria, we need to go over everything once more," he said, his voice gentle yet firm. Maria nodded, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. "I heard him, Ethan. I heard it all. The wire transfers, the hidden settlements, the bribes. He thought he could silence me, but he can't silence the truth." Ethan's brow furrowed as he processed her words. "We're going to make sure of that," he replied, his determination matching hers. They walked past the grand staircase through the long, echoing hallways that seemed to mock the very power that had once filled them. Each step felt heavier, but each one brought them closer to the truth. The study door stood before them, locked, just as it had been when Alexander tried to hide his secrets, but now Maria had the key. Behind a portrait, Maria murmured, her eyes trained on the painting of the yacht she had once seen. That's where he hid it. Ethan moved swiftly, his trained hands working quickly, pulling the painting aside. There, taped to the back, was the small brass key Maria had spoken of. The room was silent as Ethan unlocked the drawer of the oak desk. The soft click echoed in the otherwise still air. They both paused for a heartbeat, the final moment before the truth was revealed. Inside, the files were meticulously arranged. Payments, settlements, and then the folder that would change everything. Confidential, Reeves Industries Fatality Fund. Maria's breath caught in her throat as Ethan flipped it open. The photograph inside captured the devastation of the warehouse collapse, the twisted wreckage, the smoke, and the bodies of the men who had died. Her heart ached as she recognized their faces.
"These are the men he tried to erase," Maria whispered. "He thought he could buy their silence." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not anymore," he said, gathering the evidence carefully. "This is more than enough to bury him, Maria." The weight of what they held in their hands was overwhelming, but there was no turning back now. As they exited the study, the estate felt almost suffocating, the walls too close, as though they were closing in on them. They stepped into the driveway, where the flashing blue and red lights reflected off the glass walls of the mansion. A small crowd had gathered, curious onlookers, neighbors, and a few brave ones with their phones raised to capture the downfall of the man who had once been untouchable. Maria watched as Alexander, still handcuffed, paced angrily, his once perfect suit now wrinkled, his hair disheveled. The empire he had built was crumbling, piece by piece. "This is harassment," he yelled, his voice dripping with defiance. "You have no idea who I am." Ethan stepped forward, his expression unflinching. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Reeves, and now so does everyone else." Alexander sneered, trying to regain his composure. "You think these papers can destroy me? I built this city," he roared. Ethan held up one of the documents, the photograph of the collapsed factory, its timestamp clearly visible. "These men died because you ignored safety protocols, bribed inspectors to bury the truth, and when Maria overheard you confessing, you assaulted her. Tell me, Mr. Reeves, how much is your silence worth now?" The billionaire's face twisted in rage, but the eyes of the onlookers were on him now. The weight of public exposure was stronger than any threat. His power had evaporated, and no one moved to help him. The chauffeur avoided his gaze. Even his lawyer stood silent, knowing it was over. Maria stood nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her hands trembling, but her heart no longer heavy with fear. She whispered to herself, "He thought he owned everything. Now look at him." As the officers guided Alexander to the patrol car, the once grand estate seemed to fall into a haunting silence. Maria took a deep breath, her eyes closed for a moment, as she allowed herself a rare, fragile moment of peace. For them, and for us. Ethan's gaze softened as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did what no one else had the courage to do. You gave them their voices back." 3 weeks later, Maria sat in her modest apartment, the simple morning light streaming through the window, the smell of coffee drifting in the air. Her hands no longer trembled, the scars from her time in the mansion healing with each passing day. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find a young woman standing there, a microphone in hand and a camera crew behind her. "Maria Brooks?" the reporter asked, her voice tentative. "We're doing a feature called The Maid Who Exposed the Empire." Your story has inspired so many." For a moment, Maria considered stepping back into the shadows. But then she saw the quiet pride in Ethan's eyes, and she stood taller. "Please," Maria said quietly, "make it about the truth, not about me." As the reporter set up, Maria turned toward the window, the quiet hum of the city outside reflecting the newfound calm within her. She whispered softly, "Now, those men can rest. And maybe so can I." The morning sun illuminated her face as she gazed out, her spirit lighter than it had been in years. She had exposed the corruption, torn down the walls that had hidden the truth. The mansion was gone, and so was the man who had thought he could control everything. But Maria had reclaimed her peace, and that was more valuable than any wealth. And as the city moved on, so did Maria, no longer bound by fear, but free. If the story moved you, remember, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in whispers that change the world. Drop your thoughts below, like this video, and share for more stories that remind us that truth always wins.